From Buenos Aires in Argentina, Tonight with Jane Dutton. As Argentina's leadership fumbles, social movements grow in power. The leader of one of the biggest tells us what they're doing to battle state suppression and get jobs back to the people. What is the government's response? And what do South Africa's political parties teach their young leaders about decisions in a globalized world? Maybe South Africa's corporate sector is where we should be looking for our next line of leaders. That's Tonight with Jane Dutton. Tonight, politics and the crisis in emerging markets. When times get tough, people often pack up and leave their countries in search of a better life. Argentina is seeing an influx of economic migrants, mainly from Venezuela. And this is putting a lot of pressure on the leadership and the economy, both cracking under strain. Step in social movements, the voice of the voiceless. Can they provide enough solace and job security where governments cannot? And how does leadership deal with social disobedience? Those are my questions. What are yours? You can call us on our Johannesburg number, or you can tweet us on Tonight with Jane Dutton. But first, let's go over to Vuyo in Johannesburg for the headlines.
More from my colleague Jane Dutton in a bit from Buenos Aires. My name is Vuyo Mvoko. Here are our top stories at this hour. A 7-year-old child is receiving counseling after being raped over the weekend. The 20-year-old man charged in connection with the rape remains in custody. He'll be back in court next week. Earlier today, the Dross Restaurant Group issued a statement confirming the incident took place at one of its franchises. It's alleged the rape occurred in the man's bathroom after the man had scouted his victim in the children's area. Dross says it's conveyed sympathy to the child's family, and has offered assistance as well. Police Minister Bheki Cele says community members should work with police to fight crime. Cele was talking to Bonteyevel residents who were part of yesterday's widespread protests against crime in the Cape Flat communities. Party and city officials were chased from today's meeting. Angry residents told Cele they are tired with the slow pace of justice. He has promised action to address their issues.
I've been given the budget of it is 35 million. Yeah. But that tells you that we're working on it. It's 35, almost between 15 and 20,000 members of the community. Not DA, not ANC, not so-and-so, members of the community.
The ANC in KwaZulu-Natal says it'll implement the Moerane Commission's recommendations to curb political killings in the province. Premier Willis Mchunu released the Commission's report last week. It found the rise in political killings in KwaZulu-Natal was influenced by infighting and weak leadership. Among its recommendations are that the governing party take responsibility and promote political education.
We have commenced with the process of implementing the recommendation. We have assigned a team made up of Comrades Jeffries, Comrade Mkolis Kaunda, Sirit Kaba, Begintuli, Nontantla Koza, which is led by Comrade to provincial spokesperson of the ANC, Comrade Tunumagugu Sumelanezu. The report of the Commission and its implication will be tabled to the Provincial Working Committee and thereafter map out a clear implementation plan.
Well, more news at 9 o'clock. Right now, let's take you back to Jane in Buenos Aires.
Social movements have been very important in Argentina's history. They started up in the 90s and represent those on the fringes of the economy, usually the unemployed, and also the informal sector, which makes up 40% of the economy. So you can imagine in times like this, when people are really struggling, how important these social movements are and what sort of traction they gain. With me now is Luis Delia of the Melis movement. He started this movement, a very big and important leader here in Argentina. Tell us what the situation is at the moment and why people are striking and taking to the streets.
For the first time in Argentina, the neoconservative model is being implemented. Milton Friedman. It left 5 million Argentinians on the street in severe problems of employment without income. Also, we had a huge debt of $203,000 million in only 2 years and a half. As Naomi Klein would say, a self-inflicted crisis. High inflation rates, a reduction in economic activity, a brutal reduction of the Argentinian state, and the withdrawal of the states in the attention of strategic areas of society: childhood, social provision, retired people, and overall, those 5 million Argentinians without income.
Has this got worse under Macri, or has it always been like this?
No. During Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner, there was no debt. She left with a very low debt, and their indexes of economic and human development were great. And these indexes allow the Macri to get $203,000 million for Macri. So these $203,000 million were spent in the following way: 75 million of that loan ran away from the country, those speculative capitals, partners of the government, and they were spent in this import party of the open economy, and they were also spent in tourism by the upper middle class people. So they indebt the country in almost $203,000 million without having benefits for the Argentinian people.
You know, with Kirchner so popular, you wonder why there was a change of government in the first place. But this is where we are now, and I'm wondering what sort of role your social movements can have in making this a better place for people who you say are suffering under government policies.
In the neoconservative Macri's model, there are no possibilities for the people, only compensatory policies. But with Cristina, social movements were able to build houses for the people, nets of water, public works in general, gas, and the path was the cooperativization of millions of Argentinians. It was a very wealthy experience, but today Macri abandoned all that.
Do you think emerging market countries are particularly susceptible to these sort of problems? Do you think governance has a role to play in it? What sort of clout do people on the street have during these economic times?
Well, the social movements have a massive presence on the streets all over the country. Some only fight for compensatory policies. Others, as we fight in a non-violent way in order to change this neoconservative economic model. So this model would be defeated in Argentina. We also fight for Macri to resign And this is not a coup. We are not talking about a coup. But we want him to resign because he has failed. His policies have failed. And we need to restore a model that will support internal market, will support workers, middle-class Argentinians and popular majorities.
Since we've been sitting here in the last 15 minutes, several people have walked past, said things that I can't repeat on TV, pulled the zap sign, all that kind of stuff. I can tell that you are both loved and hated here in this country.
Yo expreso a un sector que confronta con los sectores.
It's because I'm the expression of a sector that confronts the oligarchy and the pro-imperialist sectors. I know what I express, and I'm the leader. Many people love me, and few people hate me.
Bueno, a mí me hago cargo de la.
But why the hatred? I mean, is it because of the amount of people you represent? Are you an economic or security threat?
Y porque expresamos.
We have expressed the class confrontation. The wealthiest sectors in this country, expressed by Macri, dreamed a country where only southern families could live well, and 44 million people, look how they have fun. I express this confrontation. That is why we, popular leaders, we are hated by the oligarchy.
Somos la figura más odiada por la derecha oligárquica.
Tell us a little more about the importance of movements like yours and get to the nitty-gritty of what Argentinians are going through at the moment. I know times are really tough, but also a little bit about the police brutality that you are experiencing and why that's happening.
Well, I represent a movement with 120,000 Argentinians in all the country. We made a lot of public work for the people. We built lots of houses for the people. We produce social habitat. More than 200,000 lots for the people. We have done very powerful things in education, primary and secondary school, and for the kids, the kindergarten. For the last 3 years, we are having lots of problems because the receipt of the government is indiscriminated and wild repression against us. With the Minister of Security, Patricia Bullrich, who during the 90s did the same thing and repress and kill many Argentinians. The government has just bought Israel's 40 helicopters with weapons and intelligence material as well. So we think they are preparing a huge repression for the next month because by order of the IMF, Macri has to adjust 550,000 million people. That is 1/3 of the Argentinian state budget. This will generate lots of social unrest. So we think there will be a huge repression in all the country.
If you've got such a big following, what is your end game here? Can you be some sort of opposition to the government? And can you work closer with unions to get to that point?
Well, actually, we have been working with the union for the last 20 years. I, as leader of a social movement, I'm part of the board of the CTA, the Workers' Central Union, where there are unions and social movements. CTA, Central of Argentinian Workers. In this CTA, it is not a union central, it's a central of workers. Each worker is one vote. This is the way we do the things, and this is the way of deciding debates.
No, gracias.
Well, we'll be back with more from Jane Dutton in Buenos Aires. Don't go away. Well, thanks for staying with us. And right now, let's take you back to Jane in Buenos Aires.
Social movements provide ballast in this country, Argentina, to the government, and they tell us that they are facing increasing repression on the streets. What is going on? Let's discuss that with my guest, Daniel Levovitsky. He's head of the Legislation Commission in Parliament, basically overseeing the law here. Very good to have you with us. What is going on as far as social movements are concerned? They are worried that they are seeing growing repression on the streets.
Well, in Argentina, we have had social movements, very important social movements since 2001, huge crisis. And thus, they have a huge presence in the social life of this country. The government is always in dialogue with them. Argentina is a very unequal country. 1/3 of the population is poor, so the government is focused on that problem. And this is shown by the new budget, which is being debated in the Congress, where 80% of public money is going to be invested in these inequalities.
I'm asking you this because of your human rights experience and also how this falls into the legal framework of the government when it comes to social movements, and what sort of protection that they can expect, and how do you allay their concerns that they are being the focus of security forces?
Well, we do not aim to protect the social organization, but we are seeking to lessen these economic effects in the population, which is vulnerable. Many of these organizations have dialogue with the government, but this is not the only dialogue channel. The government has direct action on them, especially through the provinces and the communities, and the government has public policies for them. We are not focusing in them as a subject of repression. Actually, we have a very mature dialogue with them, and we believe that when there are claims, protests on the streets, and they cut the streets, especially in the city of Buenos Aires, we think that they have to respect the circulation right of the rest of the population who are not claiming on the streets. So we have to coordinate the right to claim, which is in the national constitution, but also the rest of the population right to circulate and go to work. So we can give them the possibility of protesting on the street, but we need a space for the rest of the population who is not claiming to circulate.
In most cases, there are always three sides to every story here. They need to obviously behave within the law. What sort of legal recourse do they have, and what is the government allowed to do when it comes to demonstrations, when they turn violent? And how do you explain what we saw in December when the security forces apparently opened fire with rubber bullets and targeted journalists as well?
Sí, por supuesto. A ver, me parece que
Yes, of course. I think that the first point that has to be very clear is that the government is always focusing the social issues. And I was talking about the budget. The budget is the key. We have a new budget where a great part of the public expense is for social investment. So the government is worried. And this is logic. In Argentina, we have more than 12 million poor. There's a great inequality here, so we need to solve that situation. But we think that in a country with such vulnerability, of course, we are going to have social unrest and protest and demonstration, like December last year, and some this year. So in this scenario, what we think is, on one side, we need to be very careful in not repressing, but on the other hand, we need to order these social protests through dialogue. In last December demonstrations on the streets, when there was a debate in the Senate about retirement pensions, it was very clear the action of the government. The government and the security forces tried not to repress. They tried not to use the force against the social unrest, against the social protests. But it was very clear that some of these people were trying to provoke in order to generate violence to prejudice the image of the government. In my opinion, and this is really personal, and this has to do because I was the Subsecretary of Human Rights, it's that in general, the security forces have to order but not repress the social protest.
What do you think the unique challenges are that emerging economies face when it comes to looking after those, the growing unemployment, as well as good leadership? How do you get the two working together?
Yo creo que son los grandes desafíos no solamente de nuestro país, de la Argentina,
Well, I believe it's one of the greatest challenges, not only for Argentina, but in general, for every emerging economy in the world. How to face a world technologized more and more, that is transforming the work our jobs. On the other side, how you can insert in that scenario. And another point to consider is the economic war between China and US, and the free commerce, as it was thought in the 90s, is also changing. So in Argentina, because of these inequalities, is worse. So in this scenario, the first thing that we have to decide as a country is to determine long-range public policies and which sectors of economy to prioritize. Argentina has very competitive resources, the sector of agro-industry, energy and food. So the state should focus those sectors and others as well. There should be a dialogue with unions, with chambers, with the opposition parties, with the government, and establish long-range public policies of development of those sectors, because part of our futures depends on exportations. So we need to look for competitive sectors to develop. So, to do this, in this world of commercial restrictions, this war between China and US, the key is to look for alliances and partners. We have a very close partner, a big country like Brazil. Our destiny is bound to Brazil's destiny as well. But we need to prioritize this regional axis, the southern axis. We have complementary economic sectors. We have also with Africa and other countries in Africa.
And that's all from me, Jane Dutton, in Buenos Aires. It's back to you, Vuyo, in the Johannesburg studio.
Still ahead, does South Africa's political parties have the right idea when it comes to grooming young leaders? We speak to some of them right after this.